Welcome to my very first YouTube video. Now, if we haven't met yet, I'm Sophie and I am the author and creator of Intentional View. Today, I want to share my story of how I stopped living on autopilot and started living with more intention. Now, today, this will be more of a sit down and chat style video. I will also be creating more focused content around intentional living moving forwards, so please do subscribe if that sounds interesting to you. So I guess it makes sense to start by going back to a few years ago where I was before I started on this path towards intentional living. And one of the biggest things that I'd say is that I had zero self-awareness. And I mean like zero. Instead, I just had this vague feeling of emptiness and unfulfillment bubbling away quietly under the surface. Even though on paper, I had everything that I thought I should want: a lovely house in the countryside, a long-term relationship with my fiance at the time, and a career that was progressing in retail. But looking back, I just really wasn't all that happy on the inside. It was more like I felt comfortable, but in a comfortably numb kind of way. In reality, I see that I was stuck in quiet but destructive cycles of instant gratification. I was buying things I didn't really need. I was binge watching shows like Love Island and Real Housewives, and endlessly scrolling through social media, comparing myself to other people. On the surface, things looked fine, but underneath, it felt like my life lacked any real depth, direction, or purpose. Days often just felt like they blurred into one, like a constant cycle of work, eat, Netflix, sleep, repeat. And it just left me wondering, is this really it? Now, I've also come to realize that I have somewhat of an addictive personality, and these habits definitely weren't random. They were filling a void. But I also don't think that was entirely my fault. The 21st century world we live in is more geared than ever to keep us distracted, overstimulated, and stuck. Now, there's something powerful to be said here about learning to listen to your intuition and trust your gut, but I didn't. And then a lot of things all happened at once. I broke up with my partner, I lost my job, and I had to sell our house, all in a very short period of time. It actually all happened right around my 30th birthday, and suddenly I found myself living back at my parents' house in my childhood bedroom with all my stuff in storage. And honestly, it kind of felt like the end of my world. Now, I should pause here to reflect on the fact that I am super privileged. The fact that I even had parents that I could fall back on in this situation is not something I take for granted at all. Because it was in that childhood bedroom that I really began to take apart the pieces of my life, get curious, and start asking a lot of questions. How had I found myself in this situation I was in? Who really was I underneath it all? And where did I want to take my life from here? Now, I know these are big, uncomfortable questions, but I realized they were things I'd never really stopped to ask myself at any point in my life. So me being me, I did what I always do when I don't know the answer to something, and I started reading. Basically anything I could get my hands on about psychology, personal development, self-improvement. I read a lot of the books that would go on to massively influence how I think and live. Titles like Atomic Habits by James Clear, The Life-Changing Art of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo, and How Not to Die by Dr. Michael Greger, just to name a few. It was also around this point that I came across the concept of identifying your values, something which I'd never even really heard of before, but I thought it might be a useful exercise nonetheless. The ones I wrote down for myself were creativity, courage, independent thinking, and health. I'm not sure I truly realized the impact of that exercise at the time, but that gave me a kind of internal compass or steer for my decisions after that. During this time, I felt really determined to take small steps forward, and I developed a handful of daily habits that I could hold myself accountable to. One of those was simply going for a long walk by myself every single day. And I still look back on that period so fondly. Those walks gave me so much solitude and breathing space to just be with myself. Now, I should say that this definitely wasn't an easy or a straightforward process. A lot of it felt really messy, and for a long time, I felt completely stuck. I wasn't sure what I was doing or where I was headed. To understand how I got to this point in the first place though, I actually had to go a lot further back. Because what I eventually realized is that there were so many limiting beliefs running the show in my life that shaped how I saw myself and what I thought I could or couldn't achieve. Those beliefs had led me to exactly where I found myself in my current situation. Limiting beliefs are basically unconscious thoughts or assumptions we hold about ourselves or the world. They often come from past experiences, childhood, or things we've absorbed from people around us. And they quietly shape our actions and decisions without us even realizing it. Things like, I'm not good enough, people like me don't get to do things like that, or if I try, I'll probably fail anyway. Alongside all of that, I'd also struggled with mental health issues from a young age. As a child, I had pretty intense OCD, so I had rituals where I'd have to tap things a certain number of times, or I thought something bad was going to happen. As a teenager, that kind of morphed into health anxiety, and I always thought I was dying of something, so fear really controlled my life in a lot of ways. So there was a lot to work through there too. Not just beliefs about what I could do, but beliefs about what I thought was safe or even possible for me at all. Once I started becoming aware of them, it was like seeing all these invisible walls that I'd been living behind. I remember one day really clearly. It was a beautiful sunny afternoon and I drove to the local park with a picnic blanket, a notebook and a pen. I gave each area of my life its own page and I wrote down, these are my limiting beliefs around relationships. These are my limiting beliefs around money. These are my limiting beliefs around success. And I just let it all pour out. These are just a few of the things that came up for me. I have to achieve things to be lovable. I'm not very practical. I'm a bad driver. I'm not very sporty. I'm a bit of an outsider. I have to work really hard to make money. There's no money in my passions. Some things immediately felt silly as soon as I wrote them down, but other things made me quite emotional. But getting them out of my head and onto paper was one of the first big turning points for me. Because when you start to see those thoughts for what they are, just things that you've picked up along the way, you open the door to start questioning them. And that's where the real shift begins. It's also about digging deep and doing the uncomfortable inner work, looking at the parts of ourselves that maybe we've buried or stuffed down for a long time. This shadow work isn't easy, and it's not something that you do once and just tick off. It really takes time, patience, and a heck of a lot of repetition. You come up across the same old stories again and again, often just repackaged in different forms, and it's hard. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm still working through a lot, and I hit my head against limiting beliefs all the time. Sometimes I feel like just as I break through one layer, there's another one right beneath it. But I've come to realize and embrace that that is just part of the process. The work isn't ever really done, it's ongoing. The difference now is that I don't feel ruled by those beliefs in the same way anymore, and I can really see them more clearly. I know now how to pause, reflect, and choose something different, and that's where the real freedom starts to come in. And as I started pulling apart those beliefs, I actually found myself questioning something much bigger, the entire narrative that we're fed from such a young age and rarely stop to question. You probably already know how it goes. You go to school, you get good grades, choose a career, settle down, get married, have kids, live happily ever after, the end. But it started to feel like I'd been handed a script that wasn't actually mine. It was a life plan I didn't even write, and one I wasn't even sure that I wanted. Part of me felt really angry, actually, at society and how we're all funneled down this really narrow path before we're even old enough to question or think for ourselves. I'd always been what I like to call a good girl. I did well in school, I was agreeable, and I tried to make everyone proud. But none of it made me truly happy, because on a soul level, I wasn't actually that bothered by any of it. I was chasing the things I thought I was supposed to want, the good career, the nice house, the whole settled down life, but deep down, it didn't actually feel like me. I'd never dreamt about my wedding day like a lot of girls, and I didn't even know if I wanted kids. And I always felt a bit strange and like the odd one out for not caring about things that other people seemed to think mattered so much. And once I accepted that about myself, it was like I finally gave myself permission to stop pretending. That honestly felt like such a relief to step off the treadmill I'd been on for years and stop trying to shoehorn myself into a life that didn't quite fit. The irony isn't lost on me that it was actually the process of hitting rock bottom That gave me the space to pause, reflect, and get laser focused on what I really wanted out of life. So I'm actually forever grateful for going through that, even if it wasn't fun at the time. And just to be clear, you absolutely don't need to wait for your life to fall apart in order to make changes. You can really choose to pause and reflect on your life at any time. In fact, the earlier you start listening to yourself, the more gentle and empowering this process can really be. So through this process of deep introspection and reflection, I'd identified my core values, I was starting to build better habits, and I was slowly uncovering the limiting beliefs that had been holding me back. I found myself questioning everything I believed to be true about myself, my life, and the world around me. I was no longer simply reacting to external pressures or default habits. I was starting to choose how I show up each day, from my work to my relationships to my daily routines. It really became a springboard for setting a clear vision for my life, creating meaningful goals, setting healthy boundaries, saying no to what drains me, and saying yes to what aligns. I started to feel happier and more fulfilled because my life was actually aligning with what I cared about. The underlying stress and overwhelm that I used to feel eased too, because I wasn't being pulled in every single direction anymore. I had a much sharper clarity and focus about my life because I'd taken the time to really work out what mattered to me. And my relationships deepened naturally just by showing up with more honesty and authenticity. But looking back, that phase was still very inward focused, and I think that's where intentional living often begins. Because as human beings, we're naturally wired to think about our own needs first. We want to feel safe, secure, and in control. And when you've been stuck in survival mode, whether that's mentally, emotionally, or physically, it's no surprise that your first instinct is to just get your footing again. So for a while, it was about me, my thoughts, my habits, my sense of well-being, my purpose. And honestly, that work was essential. As Oprah Winfrey says, you can't pour from an empty cup. But what I've realized since then is that intentional living doesn't stop at self-awareness. Once you've looked inward and cleared some space, you can actually look outward and start to ask, how do I want to show up in the world? What kind of impact do I want to have? How can I create a life that feels meaningful, not just for me, but in how I contribute and connect to others? That was another huge turning point because it meant that all the internal work wasn't just about healing or feeling better. It actually became the foundation for something so much bigger. My personal intentional living philosophy definitely has a component which extends beyond the individual. Because I think once you start out on this path of self-discovery and living with more awareness, you can't help but develop a greater awareness of the culture around you and the kind of world you're playing an active part in shaping. I realised that just as we can be blind and distracted in our own lives, that same blindness can spill out onto a cultural level too. I mentioned earlier that I read a book called How Not to Die by Dr. Michael Greger, and full disclosure, I picked it up at the time simply because I was trying to eat a bit healthier. It was definitely a selfish motivation at first. The book focuses on the power of a whole food plant-based diet, and after reading it, I cut out meat and went pescatarian. But the real turning point came when I watched a documentary called Earthlings. It's a powerful and honestly very confronting film about how animals are treated across different industries like food, clothing, entertainment, and science. It completely opened my eyes, and after watching it, I went vegan overnight. It was one of those moments where you can't unsee what you've seen, and I just knew in that moment that I would never be able to go back. I've come to realize that there is so much that we simply don't see through our heavily filtered first world lens. Capitalism encourages us to want more, spend more, upgrade more, without ever really asking where something came from or what story it holds. Whether it's fast fashion being made by workers in unsafe conditions, or animals being treated like objects for a 15-minute taste sensation or a cute jumper. There's just so much to open our eyes to in terms of social justice, the environmental damage, and our health. It's so easy to say, but what difference can I make? I'm just one person. And I get it, but I believe intentional living is about personal responsibility and accountability in your own life and in the part you play in the world at large. It's about getting clear on the kind of impact you want to have, the kind of footprint you want to leave behind on the earth. Living in alignment often means doing difficult things or things that other people don't necessarily understand. For me, that's meant making some countercultural choices, like no longer eating animals, avoiding fast fashion by supporting more ethical brands, choosing not to drink alcohol, making more sustainable choices wherever I can, and focusing on experiences over possessions. And the beauty is that living a minimalist, plant-based lifestyle comes with loads of personal benefits too. When you let go of excess stuff, there's less to tidy, clean, keep on top of, your home starts to feel calmer, you waste less time on decision fatigue, and most importantly, you actually create the space mentally, emotionally, and physically to focus on what truly matters to you. When you fuel your body with whole foods, you in turn feel better and you're more energized, and it all starts to reinforce itself. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to think. Please, please, I implore you, do your own reading, do your own research, and don't take my word as gospel. Everything I share comes from a place of real, lived, and authentic experience, from the changes that I've made and the transformations that I've felt in my own life, which are still ongoing. One quote I absolutely love from the sadly late John Robbins captures a lot of what I believe about intentional living. Your life does matter. It always matters whether you reach out in friendship or lash out in anger. It always matters whether you live with compassion and awareness or succumb to distractions and trivia. It always matters how you treat other people, how you treat animals, and how you treat yourself. For me, this is a reminder that small, consistent choices made with awareness can ripple out and create profound change. I truly believe that with this kind of awareness and gradual growth, anything is possible. My hope is that in sharing my own journey, the struggles, the breakthrough, the ongoing process, it will help and inspire you in your own journey too. I like to think of it like planting a tree. At the start, you don't see much happening, but with time, care, and patience, those small seeds will grow into something beautiful. And over the years, with daily watering and sunlight, life begins to change in ways you never expected. Intentional living is ultimately about questioning what you believe to be true about yourself and the world around you, and making sure you're living your truth, not just what you've been spoon-fed by society or picked up by a process of osmosis growing up. Now, that might sound obvious, but the truth is it is so easy to slip back into autopilot without even realizing it. Even once you become more self-aware, old habits and distractions can creep back in. It's not about being perfect. Regular reflection can help you course correct, and you just keep gently realigning again and again to stay on track. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and for being open to exploring these ideas. If any of this resonated and you'd like to dive deeper and start identifying your own core values, then I've created a free Notion workbook that you can access when you subscribe to my newsletter. I'll leave a link to the workbook below, and I'd love to hear how you get on.